Hi, I'm Brian E. Denton, author of the book A Year of War and Peace and the poetry collection Inspiration. Welcome to my channel. This video is part of a series of videos I'm doing on Dante's Divine Comedy, wherein I'm reading through the entire poem at a rate of 3 cantos or chapters per week, and I plan on doing all 3 books, the Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. This is kind of my independent contribution to Baylor University's 100 Days of Dante Project, where they're doing the same thing as well. They're reading through the entire epic poem at a rate of 3 cantos per week. And if you haven't heard of Baylor University's 100 Days of Dante project, you really should, so go ahead and click through on the link that I provide down in the show notes below. Their content is superb. I think you'll really enjoy it. It's much better than mine. You know, they got real scholars rather than some rando from Queens in a button-up shirt and pajama bottoms. If this is your first time visiting my channel, first of all, welcome. And I'd also ask that you please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. We have the goal of getting up to 200 subscribers by the end of October. It's currently October 8th as I record this, and we're at 167 subscribers, I believe. So it's a totally achievable goal with your help. So I thank you in advance for that. And one quick note before we get started on the organization of these Dante videos. You'll have many different parts. You'll have this first part, which is the introduction we're in right now. This will be followed by a synopsis where I will present the basic plot and action of the canto under discussion. Then I'll proceed to discuss the characters and the themes. Then there's the takeaway section, where I'll offer my own personal view of how we can use the canto to try to live better lives. Then we'll conclude the video with an outro, and then we'll just go wherever the YouTube algorithm takes us. Alright, so with all that said, let's get right into it. Dante's Inferno, Canto 14. Once again, we pick up right where we left off. We watch as Dante the poet describes Dante the pilgrim restoring a set of leaves to one of the condemned souls he was speaking to in the last canto. With this act of pity complete and the shedding of a few more tears on the part of Dante the pilgrim, our 2 heroes then continue on their journey deeper into hell. And here, they come to the 3rd ring of the 7th circle of hell. It is a desert wasteland. It's actually a lot worse than that. It's really more like a burning plain of sand, suffering under an eternal slow rain of fire. So it's real hot down here. Real hot. Sounds just a little bit more appealing than a summer in Houston. Here we get another apostrophe, the 4th in the poem so far. And this apostrophe warns us of God's just vengeance upon sinners, and how it, and this poem in general, should serve as fair warning to those falling into sin. Dante the pilgrim looks out over this plain, and he sees an enormous amount of sinners collected here, and they're all naked. He also notes that the sinners collected here are divided into 3 groups. The first group is supine. They're laid out on their backs. The second groups are kind of huddled, not with each other, but to themselves. So they're sitting down and they've got their arms wrapped around themselves. And then you have the 3rd group. And this, Dante the Pilgrim notices, is the largest group. And these are eternally just wandering around this desert plain. Dante the Pilgrim, surveying this collection of sinners and their brutally hellish punishment, notices that one of the sinners doesn't appear to be chastised at all from this punishment. So he asks Virgil, what's up with this guy? This guy actually overhears the 2 poets talking about him. So as one does, he launches into a fairly lengthy monologue, justifying himself. It shouldn't, but this monologue often makes me chuckle when I read it, because you got this guy who's suffering eternal damnation as he's laying face up under an absolute hailstorm of fire, while laying on burning sand, and he still feels it necessary to justify himself to these 2 passersby. Maybe I shouldn't be laughing here. Maybe Dante is trying to tell us something about the all-consuming nature of anger and violence. So this guy tells us a little bit about his story, and then Virgil tells Dante what his name is. And this guy's name is Capaneus. And beyond that, Virgil is very angry, and it's not exactly clear why he's angry. We only know that he's angry, and it's probably because he's angry at this guy, Capaneus. The important thing to remember, though, is that Virgil says that this man is part of the group of sinners who are supine, laying down face up in the plain of burning sand, and that he's being punished, Capaneus, for the sin of violence against God, blasphemy. After this episode with Capaneus, our 2 heroes skirt around the edge of the dark wood, around the desert plain of kindled fire. They come to a rill, and here Virgil explains its magic powers, and also discourses a bit on the old man of Crete, naturally. And with this, Virgil instructs Dante the Pilgrim to follow him closely, because it's time to move deeper into the Inferno. There's There's really only one new character in this canto, so we're going to talk about him first. After that, we'll consider the symbolism and the importance of having this sin represented by a desert wasteland, or a fiery desert wasteland. And then we'll conclude the characters and themes section with a little bit of talk about the repeated use of military metaphors and similes within this canto. Alright, so what about this guy Capaneus? I'd like to discuss 3 things about him. First, we'll talk about who he is. Then, we'll chat for a little bit about what he's being punished for. And then finally, we'll talk for a moment about the oddity of having him represent the sin of blasphemy in this canto. Many of you will probably recognize Capaneus from his appearance in Aeschylus's 7 against Thebes. 7? 7th ring of hell? Interesting, but there's probably nothing there. While 7 against Thebes is a great piece of classical literature, and if you're not familiar with it, you should really go and read it, the more apropos work that Dante is probably drawing from here is Statius's Thebaid. Think of the Thebaid as a kind of continuation of the 7 against Thebes. It offers a more full, fleshed-out narrative of that story. And the narrative goes a little something like this. Here are the basics. You have this guy Oedipus, and you remember him as history's most famous motherfucker. Well, he relinquishes his power over the city of Thebes to his 2 sons, Eteocles and Polynices. So Eteocles and Polynices, they come up with the idea that in order to rule, they're going to do so in alternating years. So Eteocles goes first. Only, surprise, surprise, he doesn't want to give up his power at the end of the year. So Polynices enlists the help of 6 other people to help him get the throne. This is the 7 against Thebes, Polynices plus 6. And one of these 6 is Capaneus. So the 7 against Thebes, they storm the gates and they battle their way inside the city walls. And along the way, as Capaneus is scaling the city walls to get in, he curses the god Jupiter and challenges him to battle. And then he's struck dead by a bolt of lightning from Jupiter. Presumably since that moment, Capaneus has been suffering in the 3rd ring of the 7th circle of hell, where we met him today. So he, like all the other poor souls collected here, is suffering from the sin of blasphemy, the sin of the violence against God. Think about that for a moment. Isn't it odd? Why would Dante use Capaneus as the representation for blasphemy in his poem? After all, this is a Christian poem. Dante is a Christian himself, and yet Capaneus blasphemed Jupiter, the pagan god. Presumably, this would be considered somewhat favorable to Christian thinking. So it's a little odd. I mean, there's no shortage of literary characters or historical figures who have blasphemed the Christian god. It would have been easy to choose one of them. Dante could have done so, but he doesn't. He goes with Capaneus instead. I can't help but think of the Baha'i faith when I read this canto. And the reason for that is because the Baha'i faith, among other theological claims, believes that God reveals himself to mankind through what they call progressive revelation. This is simply to say that God has always been present in mankind's history, throughout all history, but he reveals his truth to mankind at various times through diverse peoples and through diverse ways. So according to the Baha'i faith then, God makes himself present through this progressive revelation. So God is present in these ancient pagan gods, he's present in, say, the Hindu gods, and he's also present in the 3 monotheistic Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The Baha'is have this beautiful metaphor for God, where God is presented as the sun, and the different prophets throughout time are just different mirrors reflecting the light of that same sun. Anyway, that's what I think about when I read this canto, because it's implied here that the Christian God, whose just punishments are presented in this poem, is punishing Capaneus for his blasphemy against the ancient pagan Roman god, Jupiter. Now let's talk about Dante's use of this fiery desert wasteland as the setting for the punishment of blasphemy or violence against God. First of all, the desert is a place that is lacking in life. It's sterile. So a life without God, according to Dante, is sterile. It's unfruitful, just like a desert. And what about fire? Well, fire and heat is often associated with anger. So this works perfectly well with this canto's contrapasso, which is this. The sinners of this canto, during their earthly life, were consumed by an inner fire, an inner heat that provoked them to commit these awful sins of violence against either themselves, their neighbors, or in the case of Capaneus, God. Only now, for the eternal punishment, the fire and the heat is external, and it's pouring down upon them constantly. Finally, what did you make of the military similes in this canto? We have similes about Cato's march across the Libyan desert, and then we also have a simile about Alexander the Great's campaign in India. I searched around on the internet for a little bit to find out what the scholars think about this subject of the military similes in this canto. Unfortunately, my time is really limited and I wasn't able to find much. Professor Berolini of Columbia University, she has this idea that what's happening here is kind of a medieval Orientalism mediated through classical literature. I don't know. That doesn't move me, but I wasn't able to find anything else. Here's what I'm going with, and I invite you to share your own opinions on this down in the comments below. Throughout the Bible, there is a constant call for unity among mankind. This is probably one of the reasons why Christianity is a universal religion prone to proselytizing. My favorite passage of unity in the Bible appears in the 133rd Psalm, wherein the psalmist writes, "Behold, how good and pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. It is like the precious ointment upon the head, that ran down upon the beard, even Aaron's beard, that went down to the skirts of his garments." Now, if there's anything more disunifying than war, I'm unaware of it. So what Dante is doing here, I think at least, is saying implicitly that when mankind makes war, outside of the confines of Christian just war theory, of course, that he's committing a grave act of disunity, and he's blaspheming against God. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. Once again in this canto, Dante the poet reminds us that the sins of violence, either against one's neighbor, oneself, or against God, are sins that are born from the vice of anger. We see this in the symbolism of the fiery desert and also in the character of Capaneus himself. I mean, this guy's still out there raging even though he's suffering this awful fate. So I think it's important to once again turn to our old friend Seneca and his book De Ira, or On Anger, for our takeaway today. Now, as it turns out, that book consists of 3 parts, and there are only 4 cantos left down here in the 3rd ring of the 7th circle of hell. So what I propose to do over the course of our remaining time in the 7th circle of hell is review each book of Seneca's De Ira, and then consider it as a whole in that 4th canto video. The reason being, of course, is that if it's true that the vice of anger undergirds the sin of violence, then it makes sense to get to know anger, to understand it, and also how to conquer it. And the best way to do that, as I've said many times before over the course of this video series, is to read and understand Seneca's great book, De Ira. So let's get to it. In Book 1 of De Ira, Seneca sets out 2 objectives. His first objective is to define what anger is, and his second objective is to answer the question of whether or not anger can be useful at all to mankind. There are some very interesting parallels between how Seneca defines anger and how Dante presents it in his poem. They both, just to take one example, describe anger as a beastly emotion that robs mankind of its humanism. For Dante, this is shown in how he uses the infernal beasts in the 7th ring of hell. You'll remember that all of them are half-beast, half-man creatures. Similarly, Seneca in De Ira writes that anger is the most hideous and frenzied of all the emotions. For the other emotions have in them some element of peace and calm, while this one is wholly violent and has its being in an onrush of resentment, raging with a most inhuman lust. And this is Seneca's definition of anger, the desire to do violence, to exact punishment. In other words, Capaneus' desire to destroy Jupiter. For the remainder of Book 1 of De Ira, Seneca then asks whether or not the emotion of anger can ever be beneficial to mankind, and he considers many philosophers' arguments that indeed it can. The conclusion that Seneca comes up with, however, is that no, anger can never, under any circumstance, be a beneficial emotion to mankind. And so we should extinguish the flames of anger at their first appearance. And he offers 2 reasons for why this is true. He writes, "In the first place, it is easier to exclude harmful passions than to rule them, and to deny them admittance than, after they have been admitted, to control them. For when they have established themselves in possession, they are stronger than their ruler, and do not permit themselves to be restrained or reduced. In the second place, reason herself, to whom the reins of power have been entrusted, remains mistress only so long as she is kept apart from the passions. If once she mingles with them and is contaminated, she becomes unable to hold back those whom she might have cleared from her path. For when once the mind has been aroused and shaken, it becomes the slave of the disturbing agent." Alright, that concludes my video for Canto 14 of Dante's Inferno. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, I ask you to please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Remember that we're trying to get up to 200 subscribers by the end of October. With your help, I think we can definitely get there. But more important than liking the video and subscribing to the channel is actually getting a conversation going on the poem in general or this canto in particular. So go ahead and let me know what you think about this canto or the poem down in the comments below. Aside from leaving a comment on this video, you can also contact me on Twitter at Brian E. Denton. I'd be happy to hear from you. These videos are going to be released every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And most days, most Wednesdays and Fridays anyway, they're going to be released in the early morning. But on Mondays from now on, just because of my personal schedule, I'm going to have to start releasing these videos on Mondays later in the day. So the next video is going to be a Monday, so you're going to have to wait till later in the day, not the early morning. Sorry about that. But anyway, I'll see you again on Monday, and until then, take care of yourselves and others. Here we get another apostrophe, the fourth in the poem so far. And this apostrophe warns us. Well, kinda, yeah.